Okay, everybody, let's get started on this session today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is in your part of the world. It's Tuesday for most of us, but goodness knows, some of you may already be on Thursday. Welcome to today's session. We're going to be doing what's new on RPG. And in that regard, I form the bread part of the sandwich. The meat, the good bit in the middle, is being provided by a good friend, Alan Seiden, who's going to be giving us some PHP tips to users. But we're going to start off with me doing a few minutes on RPG features, and then we're going into Alan and then back to me to wrap it up. So just a couple of points before we begin. Please use the Q&A tab, the Q&A, for any questions you have. This is because we want to be able to keep track of any unanswered questions, and that cannot be done with the chat. So please use Q&A for any technical questions. Use the chat window if you're having technical issues with Zoom or anything of that nature, or just to talk to one another, I suppose. But if you want to ask a question, then please put it in Q&A. All right, so with that, I'm going to start in here, and we're going to talk about RPG. In this first section, I'm going to be going over some of the enhancements from spring 2021. We had originally hoped that IBM would have announced by now and that we'd be able to tell you something about what was coming along this year, but that's apparently not until in April, and so we're going to have to do a separate thing on that once they become available. But there's an awful lot of stuff that was done in 2021 that we find a great many people aren't into yet. The first thing to notice is really this little box down the bottom here. It's all about arrays. Just about everything that was done in 2021, and indeed to a certain extent in 2020, is concerning arrays. It's concerning making them more usable or doing array-like extensions to the language. And in part, this is due, I think, to wanting to make the language feel more like home for new RPGers. If you come from a language like Python or PHP, or for that matter, Node, I suppose, arrays are a way of life in a way that they have never been in RPG. And a lot of that has to do with how primitive arrays were for so many years. But we've had a lot of enhancements now, and so that's what most of these are oriented towards. Now, so we're going to look at the new ForEach opcode, which gives you automatic iteration through arrays. We'll use the new in operation, which is, again, a nice way of doing checks. I'll talk about it more when we get there. And there's a couple of new built-in functions. %range, which is literally what it says. It allows you to just say, is this value in this range? And %list, which is a way of generating basically a temporary array. That doesn't sound useful, does it, when you first say it? But I think when you see how it's used, it makes much more sense. So let's talk about range first. All that it's going to do is it's going to return an indicator, true or false, to tell you whether the value that you have supplied is actually in the range. So you say range, and you can give it a numeric value, say 1 through 10. And then you say if none is in the range. So if number is greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 10, then this will return true. Okay. Similarly, you can say if it's not in the range. So if it's not order value in range. These values can be any data types, but they have to be compatible. So you can't say if character field in range 1 through 10, that makes no sense. But you can have a packed value here, and you could have a couple of zoned values over here, for example, because these things, as you can see, can be variables as well as literals. They can also be dates. Right? So as long as they're compatible, they're okay. They can even be function calls, which is kind of good. So if a function returns a date, you could have a function here that says today's date, right? And you could pull that in, or you could use percent date, I guess, would be the appropriate one, which is a built-in. So you can use that one there. All right, so quite a useful little fella, and something we really needed for some time, because I always find the if greater than this and less than that kind of range checking a bit ugly, and it's not immediately intuitive what's going on. List, I have found so many uses for list that it never occurred to me that I would. Now, admittedly, some of it is because it is really useful for building up a set of values in a teaching example, as you'll see later on. Susan, could you do me a favor? There's a gentleman keeps raising his hand. Could you see if you could have a look to him? Okay, so %list, it defines a temporary array. So I can do it like this. I can say list, and I've got a literal here, another literal, and I've got a function call, which is returning a character string. And I've then got an array that I've called users, and there's 5 elements in it. And so I can fill that array by saying users equals list. In other words, copy this temporary array into that. Now, you can actually use this without assigning it to another array. You can just use it directly. You don't have to work like this with it. The only place you can use this anywhere you can use an array, except obviously it makes no sense with sort A or lookup or subarray. Certainly makes no sense with subarray. But you can pretty much use it anywhere you would normally be able to use an array. So let's look at one particular example. Over the years, I've demonstrated a number of different methods for creating arrays in RPG out of non-contiguous fields. But this is probably by far the simplest and most obvious one, particularly in cases where the values or the field names are already in use elsewhere in the program. One of the techniques we used to use was basically just putting these field names into a data structure and then mapping an array across them. The problem with that is that if you were using them for other purposes, then you wouldn't be able to do that easily, and you had to play silly games to make it work. But now, if I want an array and I want just the sales values, but those are interleaved with quantities and perhaps other things, price, it might be quantity, price, total sales, it could be multiple things. We can just load them into an array like this. I can say load up the sales array from the list of January sales, February sales, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I can just list all of the fields that I want to comprise the values for that array, and RPG will load it all up for me. So it's really kind of cool. I like that. The new operator in, we've mentioned it with range, but it's more often used against arrays. So you're basically using this as a kind of lookup operation where you just want to know if the value is present or not. Very often you want to do things like, for example, if order status is in the list of overdue, pending, cancelled, completed, right? Is it a valid order status? If I want to know something like that, I really don't care at this point in time what that is. I'm not necessarily going to do anything differently because of it, but I just want to know, is this a valid code? And so I can do that, and I can do it straight against a % list. And again, these are in this case, named constants, but they could be field names. You could have, you know, a group of fields that represent the valid codes for a particular thing. So if I've got account to process, like account number dim999, I've got file names, which is an array, and I've got account field for the number of active array elements that are in this file names array. So I can do things like, if requesting user is in the list of secoffer, queue user, or current user, then I can do this. If the account number is in the list of accounts to process, so if it's in here, I've built up this array during some other process, and it contains a list of all the account numbers I need to do further processing on. Maybe it's the list of all the people who have overdue accounts, that kind of thing. Similarly, if info file name in the subarray of active, so I'm looking at the subarray of active files, the ones that have actually been loaded into here. If the file name I'm trying to process is not in there, then okay, that's an error perhaps, right? So you get the idea. And I think the other nice thing about this compared with a lookup is when you do a lookup, you basically have to compare the results you get back. You're basically saying if lookup equals 0, it wasn't there, or if it's greater than 0, it was there. And in both of those cases, the subsequent logic, it's not as obvious, right? I think it's much nicer when you can read something like this that just says, if the account number's in the list I want to process, right? If the order status is one of these, that kind of thing. It just makes the code more obvious. All right, ForEach. I first came across ForEach when I was learning PHP, and I thought immediately, oh, wow, I wish I had that in RPG so that I didn't have to have a little counter increment, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea of ForEach is that it will automatically iterate through the array. So item, in this case, is a variable that's defined to look the same as one element in my array. And what it's going to do is it's going to work its way. RPG will automatically iterate through my array, and it will feed me one item value at a time. Now, item could be a single variable, or this could be an array data structure. So it could be giving me back a whole unit of data. And the reason that I like it with doing that is particularly when you have got more complicated references. Like, for example, I've done some JSON processing. Those of you who were with us last week saw that. If I've got some JSON processing going on, then what I can do is pull a line out of that, which might be, you know, the contents of an order, for example. And because it's coming at me in this simplified copy, I don't have to worry about one level of nesting in the indexing, right? I don't have to say items, you know, so-and-so, parentheses, so-and-so, something or other, parentheses, etc. I've got one level of it out of the way. It just simplifies, cleans it up. So for each item in array, work with the item. For each file name in the subarray, same as before, right? Work with each file name. For each status, work with the status, and so on and so forth. So basically tried to take forward what we did on the previous example and just show how we can use the same thing with ForEach. Now, the nice thing about ForEach is that when you're using the new dynamic arrays, which we'll talk about in just a second, it's automagic. It takes care of limiting itself to the subarray, if you like, of active names. Now, this came out before, it came out in 2020, I believe, but a lot of people aren't using it, in part because it's only 7.4, or they were on 7.3 when it was announced and put it on the back burner because they couldn't use it. But the idea of variable dimension arrays is we don't have to make a decision up front as to how big the thing's going to be. Now, there are two main flavors, what are called variable and dynamic. Variable arrays, the programmer programmatically sets the current maximum length. So the programmer makes a decision to say, right now, I want to allow storage for 50 elements. And he sets that via %lm. And then later on, he can change that up and say, okay, well, I need it a bit bigger and increase it. So the programmer is responsible for manually setting the length. But you can also have dynamic length arrays where RPG sets the maximum as required. And the maximum is set based on the highest element number added to the array. So the highest index added. So that's what makes it fabulous for SQL result sets. And it makes it easy. I don't have to mess about with SQL cod 3 or whatever the hell it is to get the number of rows. I can just say how many elements are there in my array, because after I've loaded up the array with SQL, hey, I've got the count right there. You do provide a maximum, and this is to provide a sanity check. Basically, it's just sort of saying, you know, my original guess was 900 elements. Hey, I'm going to allow for 2,000. But if it ever gets to 10,000, there's something logically seriously wrong, either with my program or the data, right? So it's a sanity check. And an error will be generated if you exceed the maximum, much the same as when you type of error as when you exceed RPG's maximum today. There is actually a third flavor, CT data, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but I hate CT data, so I don't really count that as one of the main things. Although I do confess it's probably a little better in one regard, in that with the old method of doing it, you had to set how many elements there were for the array. And then, of course, you had to remember if you added another line to CT data to go back and change the array, and this avoids that. So I guess that's one good thing. So the three variants, dim star var, that's the variable one. It has an initial capacity of 0, and the programmer uses %ln to control the current maximum, up or down, right? So you can set the array to say 500 elements, and then when you've deleted perhaps duplicates from it, set it back down to say, no, well, there's only 300 active. And whatever the current maximum is, that's what will impact sort A, in, lookup, etc. It will automatically constrain their operation so that you don't have to worry about it. That to me is one of the critical things. I don't have to worry about, do I have spurious entries at the end of the array or anything like that. Dim auto, again, starts with maximum capacity of 0, but RPG automatically increases the size to account for the highest index. CT data, as we said, you don't have a max entries there. It doesn't make sense in this context, because RPG will just ensure that the array is large enough to contain however much compile time data you go. So as I said, the current maximum controls the scope of these kind of operations, and you don't have to worry about using %subarray when you're using those, because all of them will be constrained automatically. There's one other feature I want to mention here, a special indexing feature when you're using auto. You don't have to even worry about maintaining a little count. You can simply do something like this. Got a variable array here, automatic, sanity check is 9,999. I'm doing a display of the number of elements in the array. And this should display a value of 0, because that's what the initial value is. Then I'm just saying here, for I equals 1 to 50, set the value of the next element to I. So element 1 gets 1, element 2 gets 2, and so on, right? Loop, 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 loop. Then we display current capacity and ask RPG to tell us how many elements there are now, and it should display a value of 50, because that's the highest index that we've used so far. We can also find out, if we want to, logically, what is the current maximum. That's the sanity check value. So vary array max, and that will give us a value of 9,999. Okay, so you can always retrieve the current maximum by just saying what is %ln, and you can say what is the absolute maximum by doing this. Okay, now with that, I've finished the first slice of bread. I'm going to hand this over to Alan, and I'm going to go check and see if there are any questions in the Q&A that need my loving attention. But in the meantime, Mr. Seiden, as the sponsor of today's session, I am delighted to hand this to you and say, take it away, Alan.
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed what you just showed there. It reminded me like to avoid index problems that cause so much debugging pain over something silly, that this is not going to be a problem, especially for new developers who haven't seen this yet, haven't experienced it yet. It reminds me of some updates that PHP has, like PHP 8 has something called string contains, where you don't have to deal with indexes anymore. Yes, the string is there. No, the string isn't there. Yes or no, like your in that you showed me. And the ForEach is just so much easier. So I really like that. So why don't I'll share my screen now.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Okay. I'll just remind folks while Alan is switching in here that please put any questions for Alan in the Q&A. We've got your screen, Alan. Looks good.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to go through here. Yeah, people can prompt me. I'm not going to be looking at the Q&A. People can tell me if something comes. Happy to answer questions. Call this PHP tips to wow your users, because users do notice. They care about stability and they care about speed. Sometimes users come in and you want them to say, wow, what did you do? And you were, uh-oh, it's so fast. Okay, good. That's a relief. You like that. We'll go through, reminding you why PHP is still really, really good and getting better. And then a lot of different sorts of tips here to make it even better. We just don't hear quite as much about PHP because it's been around now on the IBM 16 years, and in the wild outside of the a long time before that. But that just means it's getting better. It's improving every year, and it's mature on the thousands, I believe, thousands of installations, and more ways to connect. We have MySQL. We can connect to Microsoft SQL, as well as several DB2 things. And the PHP toolkit is the most fully developed of the various toolkits. Keeps getting better. The PHP community is telling us they would like us to stop our previous sloppy practices, some of us, and get better to reduce bugs, kind of like what John was showing with the RPG enhancements. PHP works well with the Apache web server, and now some of you have heard the RPM installation is really fast. The installation itself is fast, easier to update, and the code itself runs faster. That's a really good thing that we're excited about here. It's about adopting RPM-based PHP. And this is just IBM's way now to install open source software. The newer generation of PHP is faster. It's 64-bit. Previous PHP is 32-bit. You don't have to use hacks to get enough memory. It just naturally has it. And you're taking full advantage of the 64-bit IBM I architecture as well. So it's really good, faster. IBM has done great work in giving us a way to install open source software, similar to what happens on Linux. So if you don't know the terminology, Yum is just the name. These names are silly, but you get used to them. Yum is how you install the open source, and RPM is the structure and the standards. Easy to manage. I hope you have Access Client Solutions installed. I assume you do. Well, if you do, then you can manage a lot of this with the graphical interface with this open source package management. So I'm going kind of fast today, so I'll show you different ways to achieve the same thing. You see there, as says, a lot of PHP packages from the Seiden repository. So there's a few little testimonials about the Seiden PHP, which is RPM based, that after IPLing one company just found that PHP started up right away, no babysitting needed. So that's part of it. You don't want those surprises. Speed and reliability. People who love Linux actually love the way PHP runs on the IBM I now, and better performance improvements. A couple of case studies here. JDS Industries runs a wonderful website for customized kind of corporate gifts and things like that. Huge order volume going through. The website has become so just critical to them with hundreds of thousands of orders. That's running on PHP. It happens at Seiden Community Plus PHP. And we did a number of things to help optimize the site, and to including something with sessions that I'll show you later. but it's running really well, or smooth as can be. Wasn't always that way. Curbstone does credit card processing. Their goal is to lower the cost of transactions, has to be really reliable. So that put PHP to the test as well, with just millions of transactions going through at high speed. And that we did some optimizations there too, but it runs really well. So very demanding environments. PHP is a good choice there. So anyway, send questions if you want them. So let's install PHP. We're going to use our Community Plus for this, citing groups. However, Zen Server is out there. It's good. So a lot of this would be similar for Zen Server as well if you choose to do that. But it's my session, so I'm showing Citing Community Plus PHP. Okay. Anyway, we have a service called Install and Learn, but you could also install yourself. We never force anybody to pay any money for anything. It's always your choice. So this is free too. But so I'm just going to show you a few things that I'm going to do an install here right in the session. So first, you need the IBM open source environment, which you can set up through the Access Client Solutions open source package management. So again, get ACS, go to the tools, open source package management, and it'll automatically start the setup of open source on your system. You need to have all objects, the only thing. You come here, it'll give you a question, SSH has to be started, and then it gives you all these packages here. These are just like IBM packages. Then to install PHP, you install the Citing or whatever repository you're using, which we provide to you. And then you choose which version of PHP you want and you install it. So I'm going to do a PHP 8.1 right now. I'm going to do it through the yum command. You could do it through ACS as well. So let's just, something fun I'm enjoying. I don't know how many of you use Visual Studio Code and Code for IBM i Liam's extension. I know there was a great demo of it before, but we may not know it as a terminals feature. So I can click on terminals at the bottom and I get a nice paste shell here. So let's just do, let's see what repositories we have. So I see there's some Citing PHP ones in there. So now we'll do yum install all the PHP components. Oh, it's installed already. Somebody installed. That's a fine. What we're going to do is now just remove it. Watch how easy it is to do these things. Yep, it's showing you everything. It's great. It gives you full information. It's removing things. And then with those removed, you can do a yum install and bring them back. Okay, fine. So now I'll do a yum install like that. It showed me all the components. Look how fast that was. And these are just the extensions and things. So it's going to show me, I'm going to say yes. Okay. One by one, it's installing all the various components. It's downloading, installing them for me. This looks like it's going to be PHP 8.1.4. You can see here we include a Zen Framework version 1 that's compatible with PHP 7 and 8. It's a special version of Zen Framework that we help sponsor called ZF1 Future, even though you should go to newer frameworks. But for those who it's hard, you can grow gradually and at least get a new version of PHP while you update or migrate from your framework. I just did a blog article on that, but we're pretty proud of that. It's helped a lot of people move to the next version of PHP. Okay, there it is. So if I do, should show me where PHP is. Now I can add a site, add a website using it with one command. Just have to do, if it's not there yet. We have a tool called site add that we document. Now I'll do add site. I'm going fast on purpose. Just want you to see it. I can pick a port number and site in PHP. You can choose whatever you want. You can choose system my PHP or summit PHP, whatever you want. I just picked site, that's me. So, and now we have a website that works and I can start it and I'll show it to you. This is giving you all the information about where it's installed. I started the web server and I will now go to the site I just did. Watch this. First time through, it takes a few seconds. here it is. So PHP is installed and running, 8.1.4. You can see the location of everything, www site in PHP. And using my VS Code, again, I love this. I love this IFS browser. Just refresh here. There it is, site in PHP. I can see my index.php, which I just displayed for you. Proves your new site works. Have all my configurations. I'll be coming back to this in a minute, but something very important with all your PHP is to make sure you have enough PHP jobs running. And I can see that's happening here with my children equals 10. That's the number of jobs. It's very important. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. I just want you to see how fast that was to install. And nice that was. And it uses the normal commands like start TCP server. It's a normal, totally normal web server. Start and stop using all your normal Apache commands. So let's go back to here. I don't know if there are any questions on that, but you can interrupt me later. Community plus PHP is compatible with other PHP distributions. Use Yum, as you saw. Nothing proprietary in there. You know lock-in, and it's verified for use. So various vendors have confirmed that this PHP works well with their products: Auction Edge, WebSmart PHP, Harris Data, Curbstone, K3S, PHP Grid, all these tools and more. So that's what we go for. Now, but for the real topic here is optimizing your web server in PHP for speed and stability. Each release of PHP gets better and better. If you're not on at least 7 yet, I recommend you do that. You'll get a noticeable speed improvement. Everybody will, no matter what kind of code you're running. And then moving to RPM-based PHP was another speed improvement, and then going on and on from there. So just running a benchmark, this script called vanilla PHP benchmark. Now, all benchmarks, you know they're not real. It's not going to reflect what your application would do, but it still shows what PHP itself does in terms of performance. This was something maybe some of you have seen before, going from the older Zen server 5.6, moving on to 7.3, and then the RPMs got better. Like the original was over 3 seconds, and we got to just about 1 second, that one test. Now, the numbers are different here because it's a different day, different test, but moving on from PHP 7.3 all the way to 8.1, the speed got even a little better from 1.3 to 1.1 seconds. Not as dramatic as from 5 to 7, but still better and better every time. And you can improve this further by taking advantage of some of the new features. For instance, PHP 7.4, the op cache has a preloader. So the very first request will be fast. The first request will be as fast as the last if you use the op cache preloader. 7.4, which I'm not showing now, but getting better and better. Apache is a good solution. Some people prefer Nginx, but I think the IBM supported standard Apache is still great. It has integration of tools like these real-time server statistics. You do this through your normal Apache web administrator, and it shows you how many threads are being used, how many users are in the system, and things like that. So I love the IBM integration there. Something we always include in our Apache configurations is Gzip and mod deflate. This is a definite speed improvement. I suggest all of you, even if you're running like RPG and a CGI RPG or some other language, check to see if you're using mod deflate, otherwise known as Gzip, because it compresses the output that the web server makes, and when it sends it to the user, it travels much faster, and you'll notice a speed difference there. We include this by default in our site ad program that creates the website configuration, but if you don't have it, check it. I'm always happy when I'm doing some consulting and people have these lines. I say, good, they read the article, they did it. So there's some details there. Now, if something's really slow, by the way, as a consultant, I love it when there's something really, really slow, because I know it'll be usually a simple thing to find. PHP itself is fast. Modern hardware, like your Power 8, 9, 10, and whatnot, is fast. So recently, we worked with a company that found it was 5 seconds to bring up a pretty simple page that didn't do that much. 5 seconds. So what could it be? What could it be? Well, we narrowed it down to something with an external call. It was calling outside. And I wondered if it was DNS, which is like looking up other web page addresses. And a way to test this is using the curl tool. I hope some of you have used that. It's a great tool on actually one of my first articles, like in 2004, 2005, was about using curl and IBMI. It lets you connect to some website from a command line. So that means you're testing, not from your application, just independently on a command line. You type curl and then the website name. Now, there's an article I linked to here that lets you see all the different aspects of connecting to it. And in this case, the name lookup was 5 seconds, meaning the DNS lookup to actually find out how to contact this website was taking 5 seconds and then timing out. And that's why there was a consistent 5 seconds every time. There was an incorrect DNS server name in there somewhere. So that's something to look for. If the problem is bad, it might be a network issue, not related to really PHP or the normal things we look at. So keep that in mind. Yeah, last week there was 2 different DNS issues. They always come in threes. I was waiting for the third one. Consultants will understand. Speaking of the network, look for bots. If you find that your site is locking up or getting too busy or something, look for the number of Apache connections being made. If it's some huge number, it might be bots that are hitting your site, some kind of random thing. Like one of our clients posted an ad on a popular social media site, and immediately I started getting all these requests. So look in your Apache logs, see if there's a lot of requests by the same request by the same company or same IP address. If that's true, you can restrict it, the IP address in your firewall. But also, some of our clients are telling us they're having success with a service like Cloudflare. We have no association with that company. You can do your own research, but it can reduce denial of service attacks. This talk is about stability and speed. You may want to consider a commercial reverse proxy if you start getting too much traffic. It'll cut out the invalid traffic and let the good ones through. So I've been seeing that more and more as helpful. Okay. Something that we're doing nowadays, I promised new tips, and this is one. I mean, those of you who've done sessions in PHP sessions, it's a common way to keep track of who's logged in and information about the person and what they're doing. What it does behind the scenes is it creates a temporary session file, usually in the /temp directory. And you'll find users get sort of logged out seemingly random times after a certain amount of time. You say, well, that's okay. They were on too long anyway. But what if you don't want to log them out all the time? Also, these files may build up, and what you may find performance reduction due to too many session files. So we found a better way is to clean up these files on a schedule. Normally, PHP itself, to say I'm a user X, user Al, and I go in with my PHP request, there's a chance, 1 out of 1,000 chance that I will be the one where PHP finally cleans up old files. That's going to slow me down. Better, don't clean them up on the fly. Instead, set a schedule where you clean them up under your control, maybe at night, or it doesn't matter if it's at night, but make it a separate process. The way to do this is in the PHP INI, set the session garbage collection probability equals 0. It means they won't clean up on the fly. Some people got confused by this terminology, garbage collection. It has nothing to do with memory, anything like that. It's strictly cleaning up old session files that many of you probably have seen in the /temp directory if you run PHP. So set that to 0 and then run a session cleanup separately. It'll clean up old session files that are older than a certain number of seconds. You schedule either your IBMI job scheduler, Rundeck, the Zen job queue if you have that, or Crony. It should be Crony, not Crony. I knew someone named Mickey Crony, but it's Crony. Anyway, so here's a script you could run that will clean up the sessions, and you can run this off hours if you want, or anytime you want. You probably want to set a higher max execution time than normal because this may take some time to run. You set the max lifetime that you would like. So like this example here, 60 seconds times 60 minutes in an hour times 6 hours. This is saying clean up sessions that are older than 6 hours, session file older than 6 hours. That's what it does. You can set that to be any time, like the time you want. And it may log out users who've been on longer that time without actually going to a new page, just kind of sitting there. Okay. And then you start a session, do the garbage collection, session GC does the garbage collection, and then ends this particular session. So we're finding this is really good. It's much easier to understand, and it's nothing random about it. You're in control. So that's PHP session. So I hope you like this one. I would like your your feedback on it as well. Many companies that do online business are growing now. There's a mix in the economy, but those who are kind of online seem to be growing. And make sure you can actually accommodate the traffic that's coming in. And there's two main places to do that. One in the PHP jobs, and second in the Apache threads. And not everyone realizes this. If you're using a good installation tool, like probably Zen Server's installation or our site add tool, we'll set up a proper number of PHP jobs, at least to start. But a couple of weeks ago, we worked with a company that said our site is doing fine with one user, but it slows down if any amount of traffic comes in. So why was that? Why was that happening? And when we looked into it, we saw that it wasn't really configured properly. There was only one PHP job running. That can't accommodate a lot of users at once. You need multiple jobs. And Apache was limited to only 5 threads. And this is roughly analogous to the number of users you would like to accommodate to come in. So here's below this are the key settings that you need in the PHP Fast CGI that gets installed. We defaulted to 10 so-called children or jobs. That means 10 jobs are running, PHP jobs. And the threads per child, 40. So actually, if you could be able to see this, if the session's still here, can I still type on this? Yeah. I do a work active job. If I go through these, I should be able to see 10, there should be at least 10, here they are. You see citing PHPs. So because that's what I created before and I ran it. So we see a certain number of these PHP CGIs, 10 plus an extra one. So that's what's running under here. That's how you determine that. And I have an article about that on IT Jungle, but the key also, you may not realize that Apache has a limitation that you can raise. By default, you can have 40 connections at a time with an Apache web server. 40 is the default. If you want to increase that, then increase it. I find nowadays originally the IBMI was less powerful, and so you'd use 5 children, 10 children. Many companies easily increase that to 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, or even more. Some companies even 600. It all depends on your resources on the system. And threads per child, likewise, you increase that too, depending on what you need. Don't willy-nilly increase it, because then you're just having jobs that may compete with each other. Just you see what you need. Look at work active jobs and see how many you need, okay? But you definitely can grow and get bigger and bigger as you need to. The PHP keeps moving forward and we keep pace with it. So in this case, just yesterday, we did an update, and you could see last week there was an improvement to pdOIBM that adds new functionality that helps, actually it was to help Japanese users to have their double byte character sets and fixing some clob and blob issues. So that keeps moving forward. But SQL and DB2 performance is also really good, like ODBC, if you're hearing about that, that's the way to go now if you're creating a new application. PDO is a good way to connect from PHP, and some other tips. ODBC, people are saying, isn't that slow? ODBC was slow, but I know what they're talking about because I was there in the 1990s also. It's not slow anymore, and it runs directly on the IBM. The same driver that runs on Windows, Linux, and the Mac also runs on the I. You can make your developers happy, or you are a developer, run your same code in your laptop, test there while connecting to your central database, and then deploy to the IBM, same code. It's covered by your IBM support as well. And ODBC has a trace capability with timestamps. You can email me if you want information on that. It's really great for seeing what's going on behind the scenes. As Don May always mentions, you could make sure you have enough pre-start jobs for ODBC. This slide talks about. We still support all the classic extensions, IBM DB2, pdOIBM. They still work, and we're maintaining them very actively. I know most of us have code that uses IBM DB2, for example. But if you're going to go to ODBC, the best extension is called pdODBC, because a couple of reasons. First, it's more industry standard, but in addition, it handles stored procedure output parameters better than the other ways, much more safely and better. And it has a fetch all function or method that can retrieve all the rows of your SQL at once. So if you have 1 million rows, don't do that. But if you have a smaller number of rows, it could be faster, just getting them all at once instead of having to loop through. This here's a code example of pdODBC. It shows you a couple of interesting things. It says new PDO, and then persistent, attribute persistent equals true. So that means using a persistent connection. It's the equivalent to what we did in the IBM DB2 of DB2 pconnect. Same thing, it's much faster that way. And second, near the bottom, we have a fetch all. So it's faster than fetching one row at a time, one record at a time, and looping through, which I've discovered. Okay, so here's an example you could actually use with PHP. There's also a lot of profiling tools to help you measure your application. You may find there's some logic mistakes or things like that, unnecessary looping. How do you narrow it down? Multiple ways to go. Of course, the IBMI itself has many tools, Visual Explain, Plan Cache for the database. Press F12 in your browser to see what's going on at the network level. But there's something you should know about, which is silly. It's almost embarrassing to mention it, but it's so simple that sometimes it can be effective. It's using the micro time function, which means if you can edit your code, you can just have a start time, an end time, and it gives you the duration of something that happened. So like in this case, I have this function called run slow logic. Start, the duration, beginning and end, and then a write to a special error log. In this case, I am writing error log. Doesn't only write to the standard PHP log, you can write to your own error log, which we're doing here. So it tells you what's happening. You can just narrow it down, and don't make any assumptions. You'll find exactly what's going on. Also, there's an extension called XDebug. Both Zen Server and Citing Group Community Plus include XDebug. Don't turn it on until you need it because it'll slow down your application. But if you do turn it on, it outputs some really interesting data that you can then display graphically and see what's going on with your performance. There's a free tool called Do Cache Grind. It's on our website. And you can see in this screenshot, it's showing you the amount of time it took to do the DB2 exec, the connect, and all the fetches, and how many times it happened. So it shows you basically where the time's going in your application. And that's using XDebug and QCache Grind, and we have a web page on it. Another example, in the Laminas application, seeing where the time was going, had to do with routing. Sometimes it's funny, the time isn't going where you think it's going. XDebug also permits interactive debugging of your application. I don't have time to demonstrate it here, but this is the screenshot from Visual Studio Code, and we have a tutorial on how to actually step through line by line in your application to debug it that way. Toolkit's doing great. I'm finding the performance is excellent. Somehow I think some of the early code examples weren't good and people thought it was slow, but actually doing it correctly is quite fast. Just use the stateless equals true option, and it's very fast for calling RPG, CL, and whatnot, COBOL. We have some new updated samples, including how to handle the dreaded message waits. I can hear John and Susan, fix your program, but in case you don't fix your program or there's little mistakes, you don't want your PHP hanging up and users feeling like it's not stable or fast. And so there's some tips in these examples of how PHP can handle that going on. I just suggest you can update very easily once you get rpm-based PHP installed using yum through ACS here. Updates available, or through the yum command. We always publish our changelog. You can see here. I'm getting near the end of my prepared material here, but how to stay updated. This is interesting because people are so busy adding features to their applications, they don't have time to do updates. So I suggest schedule reviews of your environment, of your actual environment with your team. Say, what do we have? What version do we have? People are realizing they need to update their versions of PHP now for security, auditing, and other reasons, and performance and stability. So it's key to have a plan. I think, okay, this year, beginning of the year, we're going to go to PHP 7.4 and try to be on 8 by the end of the year, or early next year, something like that. So if you choose, you're not required to at all. If you choose to work with us on a support contract, we help there, where we don't only help during emergencies, which we do, but we do regular tune-ups with you. So we're talking to you at least once a quarter. Even if nothing goes wrong, we're there with you to be able to chat with you and say, what version do you have? How do you think we should do? When should we upgrade? And then provide help along the way and maybe give you some tips from what we've learned. So that helps. So you do this in-house, or you could work with an outside company. And IBM also offers some alerts about different open source updates. For our support, we call it Smart Support. It's a bit different because we provide hands-on tune-ups along the way. But to get started, you can definitely do this without our help. It's free and open source. But if you'd like to install and learn, it's very interesting. You work with us, you learn a lot along the way. That's a pretty low price, $995. We guarantee you get a good installation, everything correct. And then you watch us, we record the session. You could learn from that, offering migration help too, migration consulting. And then for business use, we have break fix support and proactive tune-ups advice and even developer support, which is great. It's for developer productivity, meaning you stay in touch with us and we stay in touch with you and we answer your questions along the way from a development standpoint. How do I configure this? How do I do this with Git, Apache? What technique should I use? I'm having this problem. So it's not necessarily a big production problem, but like, hey, what's the best way to do this? I could Google it or DuckDuckGo or whatever, but I'd rather ask you, Cyber people. It's easier, quicker, and I know you probably give us a good answer. So we enjoy that. Okay, so those are some of our services there. Now, as far as what version is best, last year we were recommending PHP 7.4. Now it's still a good release, but we're recommending 8.0, 8.1 if people possibly can, simply because 7.4 will start to wind down in a way by the end of this year. So you can go one step at a time. Don't panic. It's fine, but try to have a plan to get on 8 and 8.1 soon if you possibly can. It's not that radical a change. It's getting just more stringent and strict. You just want to be on a supported release is our philosophy anyway. It's always better. So that's my prepared material. Does some of you have questions, tough questions, or any kind of questions at all? I also mentioned we do a free upgrade assessment if you'd like. There's a link here, or just go on our website. And these slides will be made available to all attendees. Are there any questions?
Answering most of the questions, Alan, but there is one about performance of using web service calls versus ODBC.
Oh, web service calls versus ODBC. Here, I'm going to keep sharing because I'm not sure. You can see me, right? Web service calls versus ODBC. So you're thinking of, well, I think if you're on the same system, ODBC is probably going to be faster, but web service call isn't slow. Especially now, consider this. It's always an it depends, but I try to give an informed it depends. A web service call might be faster potentially than doing multiple queries. If your web service call is calling a program, a compiled program that does a lot, that might be faster. So I would say don't do it just based on speed. I think a web service call can be fast. It's really where do you want to put your SQL? Where do you want to put your queries? Do you want to have queries in your PHP code where your developers handle it? Do you want them somewhere else? Do you want to have stored procedures where the SQL is totally separated in a different way? Do you have program calls and RPG program calls? Do you want to potentially test your application separately, different parts of it separately? So you want something you can test using some kind of postman test or something with HTTP. So I don't know if that made sense as an answer. If you want to just go have there's more detail to your question, I'm happy to answer that. Oh, I see. RPG web services externally. Yeah, someone's answering. Erica, thank you, Erica. She says, I use RPG web services, external web services, and SQL depending on the data. Not notice a substantial difference. Sure. RPG web services are going to be pretty fast. RPG is going to be a persistent through the way CGI is implemented. It's going to be a fast response. Thank you, Erica, for that response. Yeah. I'm seeing various things here. Currently have a few non-critical PHP apps in Zen Server Basic. Well, yeah, you know, I didn't mention it, but Zen Server Basic is no longer supported, so you're technically out of compliance there. I don't think anyone's going to really come after you, but you're also not upgrading your PHP. So is migration straightforward? Oh yeah, it's definitely straightforward. You install the new PHP, then you can copy your code over into the htdocs. That's it. It's just that if you're going from a very old PHP to a newer PHP, the newer versions of PHP may start complaining, giving you warnings like, you did something wrong or that kind of thing. However, you can just do that over time and turn off some of the warnings until you get it straightened out. No, the idea is easy of just doing it. Can you do ODBC connection pooling from Mark? Definitely you can. I didn't cover it here because in PHP we have persistent connections available too. So persistent connections are handled at the language level, like the PHP level. Connection pooling is handled at the driver and manager level. And so you can do it either way, Mark. Yeah. If you need a reference, I can give you information on it. I just haven't found connection pooling to be better than persistent connections in any way. It's a similar idea that the jobs are there waiting for you and ready and optimize, initialize. But just drop me a line if you want more information about it. But definitely you can do connection pooling as well. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mark. Mark and Mark. Yep. Okay, great. Yep. Any other questions? Any questions? I mean, I think our timing is good here, John and Susan. I think we're kind of on track here pretty well. But you want to go back? Do you want to go to the other part of the bread, John's bread, the sandwich? What do you think?
I think so. Let's do that, Alan. And then if people think of any other questions in the interim period, they can come back at the end. You'll still be here, right?
I'll still be here. I'll still be here during the rest of the sandwich. I'm going to stop sharing now, okay. And I'll be here. And I'm looking forward to watching what you're going to present now too.
I'll cut in and do my sharing if I can find where I put the presentation window. I keep losing the darn thing. I don't know why. Oh, there it is. All righty. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alan. A lot of good information there. And it's reminded me that I've got to update our PHP instances.
I know, John. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about that. Yeah. It'll actually be good. You can speak to your fans about it later.
Yep.
Okay.
All righty. Before we go any further, there was a question raised during the session about the positioning of the not when you're talking about using the in operation. And the question actually was posed against list, but it's the same thing. So I've highlighted this one. This was actually a mistake in the handout. Naughty me. That'll teach me to just decide to go from a true condition to a false condition without actually testing the code. Basically, if you're going to use not, you need to parenthesize, that's how easy for me to say, parenthesize the expression so that this all becomes a simple true false value. So no, you can't say if info file name not in, you can't do it that way. You have to treat this as a complete expression that returns a true false value. And then if you want to negate it, you have to put the not out in front. And the compiler seems to insist on having parentheses there. I must admit, I was a bit surprised that it insisting on that, but unless I screwed up my mistake, my example, that's what it is. So small PTF needed to the handout. So let me just go back. We had the contents. We had the meat of the sandwich. Now we're back to the bread, back to the crusts again. So we're going to look at max array and min array, which again, these are all array oriented, all again oriented towards new programmers who expect this kind of capability. We have %split, which will chop a character string into bits, basically. We have lower and upper, and I'll talk about why they're a good thing to use. And we have %fields, which means that if we want to sort data structure arrays on multiple keys, we no longer have to code qsort type routines to handle that. We can do it directly with RPG. So onward. Again, any questions in the Q&A, please, and we'll be around at the end to answer any more questions. And if you think of anything more to ask Alan, feel free to do so. It'll just be a free-for-all in the final section. All right, so % max R and min R. Basically, we had %max and %min some time ago as built-in functions, but they would only give you the maximum value, which is the maximum value from this list of items. And I always felt that it would be much more useful to be able to say, well, what's the highest value in this array, not, or lowest value in this array, not just in a list of fields. The problem was that %min and max were designed to actually return the value itself. And so there wasn't a natural fit, because saying what's the maximum value in this array and just having it come back with the value really didn't help if there was other associated information you needed. So these things actually return the index from the array. So if I have something like this, I've got an array of 12 sales by month. I can use %list to actually put some values in there. This is just from a test program. So there's a list of values that are going to populate this array. And then I can say the max value is the maximum from the array, sales by month. Min value is at this position. And then this little display statement here just says the high index is this one, and its actual value is this. And if you type this code in and run it, you'll see it just works nicely. So it's a nice clean way of obtaining the highest and lowest values within an array. And of course, as I say, if rather than just a simple array like this, what we're talking about is a data structure array, then it gives you the index so that you can easily get hold of all of the other associated information. So just an example of doing just that. I've got, in this case, I've used the auto array feature, and I've said I've got a sanity check of 500. And I'm loaded this array up with sales data in SQL native IO, logic of the program as we proceeded, whatever. It really doesn't matter how I got the data, but there is a sales rep number and a name, and there's sales to date there. Now, if I want to know at this point in time, who's the poorest performer so far this year, maybe, then I can get the index of the minimum array, sales data, sales to date. So this is the value we're looking at. What is the lowest one for that? And then I just display the poorest performing rep is currently, and then we say representative number. And because I tracked the index here, I can use it to get me the sales rep's number and his name. And this is what would actually display from the particular test set that I had. Poorest performing rep is currently rep 2345, name Unlucky Smith. Well, with a name like that, you wouldn't expect him to be successful, would you? Anyway, so that's basically an example of using it with a compound data structure. Split. Split basically chops things up. So if I have a text string like this, the quick brown fox, blah, 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 and I've got a set of words, I've got an array that I've said is auto, but to a maximum of 20. And I've got an individual word definition, which looks like an array element. So I can say words equals split text string. Now, by default, this separator is a space. So when I run this code and do the ForEach loop, so for each word in words and display word, I'm going to first display is going to say the, then quick, then brown, then fox, and so on and so forth. Now, in this instance, I'm assuming in that first example that I actually want to keep this data. I'm going to do something else with it. For example, one of the things I want to build from this is a generalized routine that splits individual words up so that I can then tell it, okay, I want these formatted to fit 50 character lines, for example, or 80 character lines, or 20 character lines, and then I can use the array to build it for any shape I like. But if I don't want to keep it, if I don't need to retain that data for any other purpose, I can actually do for each word in split, because split is a temporary array. So I can just do that and that works just fine. Okay, so that's a nice way of doing it if you only just want to grab the text and do whatever with it. Now, I said that the default is a space, but we can specify separator characters, character or characters. They are all treated as individual characters. So in this example, I'm looking for a space or a comma or a period or a double quote or an exclamation or a question mark. Right, so what I will get back from this particular one is this short paragraph contains commas, quotes without the quotes, and periods. Is there a question, etc., etc. Okay, so basically it's going to bring out each individual word in there. Now you'll notice that when you have separators like this, I've got a comma followed by a space followed by a double quote. That will be ignored, right? So I'll get the word commas, and then the next word I get will be quotes. Consecutive separators are ignored, and it would be nice in some ways to have a variant of this where we didn't, where we could say don't do that, because it does give you, the first thing I thought of was, oh, that would be good for dealing with CSVs in a nice simple way. But it doesn't work in many CSVs for the simple reason that if I've got something like this, ABC, comma, 1, 2, 3, comma, DEF. Now, if I process that with copy to import file, for example, this is field 1, field 2, nothingness, blank for field 3 and field 4. But split will only give me 3 because it will ignore the 2 consecutive delimiters. So in those circumstances, if you want to do it for something like this, you're going to have to do some pre-processing of the input. Maybe, find all the instances of 2 commas together and stick some arbitrary character that can't appear elsewhere in the string in there and then test for it later, whatever, right? But basically, you're going to have to do some pre-processing. All right, now, see, there's a question about, can you use regex within split? No, regex still isn't supported in RPG natively. So the answer to that, Josh, is no. But if you really, really, really want regex in RPG, then there's probably an RFE out there somewhere that is looking for your vote. Okay. I'll mention to Anton. We'll have to wait for %explode, possibly. I don't know if we're ever going to get that. Of course, there are things that you can do with data into data gen in a lot of these cases. So, you don't necessarily need everything under the sun. All right, % lower and upper, fast and safe way of upper or lowercasing a string. Most people have their own flavor of some kind of xlate routine, or they've used icon V or whatever. But to me, this is, I like handing off the responsibility to RPG. I really don't want to have to worry about, with xlate, for example. I know an awful lot of people whose xlate routines don't work if somebody has an accented character in their name. If their name starts with an accented character, for example, like Anton, a lot of people called Anton have an umlaut, I think it is, over the A. So I should have looked at that on Anton's question. But anyway, So this is nice. It deals with character fields and UCS2 fields. And you can also specify that you're going to start at a particular position, and you can specify how long you want to do. So the start and the length represent the number of bytes for character fields or the number of double bytes in UCS2. Now this particular example down here, if I display the lower of the input field, which is this one, then I'm going to get John Paris. If I display upper, I'm going to get John Paris like this, all capitals. But if I wanted, I can also do for each word in split, for example, which would give me John and Paris as two separate words, and then uppercase only the first character. Right, so I'm going to have the uppercase version of that for the rest of it. Now, the like I say, it's nice, it's safe, and RPG takes the responsibility, not me. The new %fields built-in function extends the capability of sort A, and it allows us to do multi-key sorting. So I've got an example here. I've got an array that I've called all animals. Whoops. All animals that was loaded in the case of my test program by a simple read loop. Each animal has an ID, which is an integer, a name, which is a varchar, a type, and a weight. And then what I've done here is say sort A all animals using the fields type and weight. And weight is subordinate to type here based on their sequencing here. So it'll sort to weight in type order. And then I can now just say for each animal, and I can say this is a type weighing so much, and what we get is something that looks like this: a budgie weighing 0.2, a cat weighing 4, cat weighing so and so, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's basically, we don't now need to go to qsort to do this kind of sorting. And inevitably someone's going to say, oh yeah, well, but when I loaded the array, why didn't I use an order by in SQL? Well, of course you could. The difference being that if I want to then reorder the exact same data, I've got an interesting problem on my hands in SQL, because potentially the table may have changed, and at the very least there's a performance issue there. Whereas if I've loaded it up like this, I can sort it any which way I want. The user says sort it by ID, I can do it. If they say name and type, I can do it, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's all I've got in the way of charts. So let me just have a quick look at the Q&A and see if there's anything that I haven't addressed. So Mark asked, Mark asked about do I need to define Word? And the answer is yes, you do need to define the instance element when you're using the ForEach. So the split of a string is CC 1200. Jeepers. Aki, I have no idea. But I believe it only works with, no, it only works with regular character strings and UCS2. So it only works with twos and with single byte and double byte. So I don't think a CC 1200 UTF-16 would work anyway. I don't know. I'm honestly not sure about that. Not something I normally have to worry about in my daily life, but I'd love to know what you find out. All animals doesn't have to be qualified. Oh, darn it. Have I created another example where I haven't put the, oh, well done, Juan. Juan wins today's prize for spotting the deliberate mistake. My apologies, there should be the keyword qualified in there. And yet I could have sworn I actually had that as a real piece of code that was running. How did I get this if it didn't run? Well, there's an interesting thought. Anyway, I'll have to go back and check that later. James, nothing new will ever be added to anything other than 7.3 and 7.4. So yes, if you're on a release prior to 7.3, it's bad for your health, stop it. But there are no new functionality has been added to releases prior to 7.3 for, I think, about 2.5 to 3 years, something like that. In Sorte, is there a way to specify descending? Right now, Vlad, you can only, as Juan has pointed out, specify that you want descending for the whole thing. So you can say Sorte parentheses D, but yes, I agree, it would be nice to be able to say, I want ascending on this and I want descending on this one. But right now, that is not an option as far as I've come across. Let me see. Glenn, why does it have to be qualified? Just because it does. All data structure arrays have to have the keyword qualified. It's a rule. I've never quite understood it, but it isn't going to change at this point in time. So, you just have to. Josh, when using list and calling a function, can the function return an array? Oh, good grief. I would doubt very, okay, so Josh, basically, I'm not quite sure what the rules are with arrays in this regard. Basically, when you use list, the data type of the item that you are comparing it to has to be compatible. In other words, when you're saying if X in list, blah, 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 then you're basically saying that the things in list are compatible with the data type of X. Now, what you would do, of course, is just simply use the in against the array name. You wouldn't need to do a list, right? So having a list with a function, I'd tend to call the function first, and then just use the array against the option. But I don't believe that using list will work in the way that Josh is asking. Sorry, I can't be more definitive about that. It's not something that's ever occurred to me, and so I've never explored it, Josh. Okay, I think that is all the questions that we have at the moment, and we're at the end of our time anyway. Do you have any more comments or anything you need to add, Alan? And you'll have to unmute yourself first. There you go.
I'm a professional, almost. Nothing more from me. No, we will be providing the slides to everybody and a copy of this recording so people can go back and they can get an update assessment if they want one. But I liked hearing everything you were saying, John. I guess the message is everyone keep moving forward and take advantage of these great new features we're all seeing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think for those who get stuck on older releases, I must confess I feel sorry sometimes because so much has happened in the 7.3, 7.4 time frame, and a few of the better pieces were in 7.2, but things have accelerated so much in the last few releases and TRs. There's so much missing SQL capability, for example, in the older releases that you just can't get. And IBM are never going to PTF stuff, or rare. The only thing they ever PTF into an out of service release is critical security issues for people who are paying the extended support charge. But you really need to try and keep current, and they've certainly made it a lot easier by having these extended release cycles using TRs to add functionality rather than have to do a whole release upgrade all the time. Anyway, okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Alan. Great to listen to you as always, my friend.
Thank you, John and Susan, for all you do here for organizing all this. It's really great.
Thank you to the Steiden Group for sponsoring this, because we couldn't afford to do it just for the fun of it. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you all very much. If you have any more questions that come to mind afterwards, you have our emails and things in the presentation handouts. And we hang out on various internet forums and one thing and another. You'll find us out there somewhere, and happy to answer any questions anytime. So with that, I'm going to end the session and thank you all for joining us today. Once again, Alan, thank you for your contributions, and cheerio everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.